I'm Tim Janisewski. Welcome to our devotional study for today on the Gospel of Matthew as we shine the spotlight upon his words, his testimony, his gospel concerning Jesus Christ. And as we saw from our last devotional, we're at an exciting hinge in this particular writing. In chapters 1 through 4, Matthew has given us a preparation for the coming of Jesus, but in chapters 5 through 28, we hear and receive the full presentation of Jesus' ministry. We noted also in that template of Jesus' ministry from chapter 4, verses 12 through 25, that Jesus came to his ministry with a framework, a ministry plan. He indeed had a target area, Galilee of the Gentiles. He had tactics that he wanted to use, primarily his mighty words and preaching and his mighty works backing them up. Third, he built a ministry team, what we call the disciples. And fourth, Jesus had a ministry terminus. He had an outcome, being faithful and fruitful for the kingdom of God. So as we come to this particular chapter, we're going to be looking at the ministry tactic of Jesus in his mighty words. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in chapters 5, 6, and 7, as we saw. And that'll be followed by examples of Jesus' mighty works, 10 miracles in chapters 8 and 9. And in our last devotional, I called the Sermon on the Mount the Goat Sermon. That's not because it's a goat. It's not because it's bad. Goat is good these days. It's the greatest of all time. And so now we dive into Jesus' opening words for this greatest of all time's sermons. And I would argue that he does so with what one could argue is the greatest of all time sermon introductions, the Beatitudes of Jesus. You might remember way back from our first two devotions, we looked at the genealogy of Jesus. And I mentioned that it was kind of an odd place to start a gospel because if you're a public speaker, if you're a preacher, you want to begin with a bang. You want to grab people's attention because any good preacher knows that if you don't get people's attention for the first 3 minutes, you most certainly will not have their attention for the remainder of your message. After a while, they'll start fidgeting, they'll pull out their cell phones, they'll tell you later that they were looking at the text on the cell phone, but I secretly believe that most of the time they were making up their grocery list or checking the sports scores. Well, be that as it may, it's important to have a great sermon introduction to a great sermon, and I think Jesus does a brilliant job of this in the Beatitudes that begin the Sermon on the Mount. Why do we believe that? Why do I suggest that to you? Well, you will notice as you read through the Sermon on the Mount, the word blessed is pronounced. Let me turn to that text right now and read to you the Beatitudes. Jesus says these words from the English Standard Version. He opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they treated the prophets who were before you. Did you hear that word blessed repeated over and over again? In fact, if you count 9 times, Jesus says blessed, 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 blessed. There's a lot of blessing in the Sermon on the Mount introduction. The Greek word there is makarios. It's repeated all 9 times, and it means God blesses certain people, or certain people are blessed by God. Other interpretations for this word are fortunate in the eyes of God. To be congratulated are these people by God. Having received the grace of God are these particular individuals. And so the word blessed, makarios, is emphasized throughout this sermon introduction. And I think that should grab your attention. It certainly grabs my attention. Do you want to be blessed? I certainly want to be blessed. I like to be blessed by most everyone. I'd like to receive the favor of most anyone worth having their favor anyway. But to have the favor of God himself, to have indeed the blessing of God himself, I want that in my life. Don't you want that in your life? And Jesus comes out 9 times saying, you want the blessing of God, the favor of God. Let's start right there. Does he have your attention? I hope so. Well, in all 9 of these occasions, they are followed by 2 parts. If you will, the first part of what Jesus says in each of the Beatitudes is the word blessed. God blesses, God blessed. And then in the second section, Jesus follows up with a list of virtues or character traits or values that are native to or developing in someone who receives and has the blessing of God in their life. That's part 2. And then part 3 is the nature of the blessing that God will bestow. Every one of them follows this pattern. The pronouncement of the blessing. Secondly, the values and the virtues and the character of those people who are blessed. And then finally, then Jesus tells what the blessing itself, what its content is in each and every one of them. Now, what I want to suggest to you in looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and in particular today, the Beatitudes, is that the things that Jesus says constitute the character and values and virtues of a human being are not the same ones that you would typically find among people in our culture today, in our society. If you asked for the kind of person who is blessed or fortunate or to be congratulated, you likely would not find the kinds of things that Jesus is going to say constitute the blessed life. And we're going to look at what those are, that second column, if you will, in tomorrow's devotional, our next devotional. And then I think you're also going to find that what Jesus says in terms of the content of the blessing is further countercultural. If you asked what constitutes someone who is fortunate or blessed or to be congratulated, what's that content of the blessing or the good fortune? The things that Jesus suggests and recommends as kingdom blessings are quite different than the lists that you would get from the culture today. And we're going to look at those content items in our devotion for 2 devotions from this one today. But the thing I want to emphasize is that they are countercultural. They are contra the things that you would expect that the world would value and commend to us. So be ready for that from Jesus. If you want the blessing of God, the favor of God, the congratulation of God, then the things that are going to be manifest in your life and the content of the blessings going to run different than what you would receive or hear from by the person out in the street in our world today. So we're going to unpack those carefully in our next 2 devotional studies looking at the Beatitudes. So that's our introduction. Take some time now to read through the Beatitudes, looking for those 3 aspects: the blessing, the character, virtue, and values, and then the content of the blessing as we prepare to continue to look at this greatest of all time sermons. I'm Tim Janisewski for Spotlight Good News Ministries. As always, like us on Facebook, share us with other people, and keep on growing in your Christian faith. We'll talk to you next time.